The conference hall on Xanthera Prime stretched as far as Nathan Cross could see. Thousands of seats filled with beings from across the galaxy, creatures of every imaginable shape and color. Some had 6 legs, others floated in contained fields of energy. There were beings made of crystal that caught the light and scattered rainbows across the walls. There were massive creatures that needed special platforms just to hold their weight. And somewhere in the back, almost hidden from view, sat the human delegation. Nathan adjusted his collar and tried not to feel small. At 42 years old, he had spent his entire career studying ancient civilizations. He had degrees from 3 universities and had published more papers than most scientists twice his age. But none of that seemed to matter here. In this room, surrounded by species that had been traveling the stars for thousands of years, humanity was nothing more than children playing at being adults. The lights dimmed and a spotlight illuminated the stage. Professor Krelthar moved into view and the crowd erupted in applause. The Xanthori was an impressive sight, standing nearly 8 feet tall with 6 crystalline limbs that moved with fluid grace. Light seemed to pass through parts of the professor's body, creating shifting patterns that Nathan found mesmerizing despite his nervousness. Krelthar began to speak, and the translation devices in everyone's ears converted the sounds into understandable words. The professor's voice was smooth and confident, the voice of someone who had never been questioned, never been doubted. The presentation was titled, Anomalies in Biological Development, a Study of Impossible Evolutions. Nathan felt his stomach tighten as images of Earth appeared on the massive screens behind the professor. Beautiful images of forests and oceans, mountains and deserts, but Krelthar wasn't showing them to celebrate Earth's beauty. The professor was showing them to explain why Earth shouldn't exist. According to Krelthar, Earth's biodiversity violated every known principle of evolutionary biology. The professor showed charts and graphs, complex mathematical models that supposedly proved humanity's development was statistically impossible. The location of Earth in the galaxy was all wrong. The speed of evolution was too fast. The complexity of human DNA made no sense. Every piece of evidence, according to the professor, pointed to one conclusion. Humanity was an accident that somehow survived when it should have died out millions of years ago. The audience laughed at several points during the presentation. Not cruel laughter exactly, but the kind of laughter that comes from disbelief. How could a species so poorly designed have made it to the stars? How could creatures as fragile as humans have survived on a death world like Earth? It was almost funny when you thought about it. Nathan's colleague Claire Bennett sat beside him, her jaw clenched tight. On his other side, Kevin Park stared at his tablet, probably running his own calculations to refute what they were hearing. But Nathan knew it wouldn't matter. Facts didn't change minds when those minds were already made up. The worst part came near the end of the lecture. Krelthar displayed a genetic comparison chart showing human DNA alongside the DNA of a dozen other species. The professor pointed out sequences that didn't match any known evolutionary pattern. These gaps and inconsistencies, Krelthar explained, suggested that humans were either the result of a failed genetic experiment by some unknown race, or more likely, just a cosmic fluke that got lucky. The professor's final recommendation was delivered with what seemed like genuine concern. Human research should be supervised by more established species. Human expansion into space should be carefully monitored, not because humans were dangerous, but because they might hurt themselves. After all, you wouldn't let a child play with dangerous tools unsupervised, would you? The applause when Krelthar finished was thunderous. Beings from across the galaxy stood and cheered. Nathan remained seated, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair so hard his knuckles turned white. He wanted to stand up and shout. He wanted to present his own research, his own theories, but he knew no one would listen. Not today, maybe not ever. After the presentation, the human delegation gathered in their assigned quarters. The rooms were nice enough, but they were located in the oldest section of the station, far from the main conference areas. Even the accommodations reminded them of their place in the galactic hierarchy. Ambassador Sophie Reeves tried to put a positive spin on things. She was a veteran diplomat, 55 years old and experienced in the art of turning insults into opportunities. But even she looked tired tonight. The lines around her eyes seemed deeper than usual. "We need to think long-term," Sophie told them. "These things take time. We can't expect to change thousands of years of established thinking overnight. We build relationships slowly, prove ourselves through consistent effort, and eventually earn their respect." Nathan couldn't take it anymore. He stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. How long are we supposed to wait? How many more lectures like that are we supposed to sit through? They treat us like we're stupid children who don't understand how the universe works. But we're not stupid. We're just new. And being new shouldn't mean being worthless. Sophie started to respond, but Nathan wasn't finished. He pulled out his tablet and displayed an image on the wall screen. It showed a planet, rocky and barren, with strange atmospheric readings that suggested artificial structures beneath the surface. "This is Kepler 442b, Nathan said. "It's an unclaimed space about 40 light-years from here. I've been studying the preliminary scans for 6 months. There's something there. Something old. Older than any civilization currently in the collective. I think it might be ruins from before the current galactic powers even existed." Captain Lisa Monroe leaned forward with interest. She was the commander of the Horizon's Edge, the research vessel that had brought them to the conference. At 38, Lisa had already earned a reputation as one of humanity's best ship captains. She had started in the military before transitioning to civilian exploration, and she brought a practical mindset to everything she did. "What kind of ruins?" Lisa asked. Nathan brought up more data. "The structures show energy signatures that don't match anything in the collective database. The materials used in construction are more advanced than what we currently have, and there are symbols markings that appear in several locations across the site. I've seen similar markings before. In old earth cave paintings, in ancient ruins in South America and Egypt, places that shouldn't be connected but somehow share the same iconography." Kevin Park nearly jumped out of his seat. "You think there's a connection between this planet and Earth? That's incredible. If we could prove that ancient humans had contact with whoever built those ruins, it would change everything we know about human history. Or it might prove something even bigger," Nathan said quietly. "What if the connection isn't about contact? What if it's about origin?" The room fell silent. Claire broke the quiet with a careful question. "You're suggesting that humans might be related to whoever built those ruins? That's a pretty big leap based on some matching symbols." Nathan nodded. "I know how it sounds. But think about what Krelthar said today. All those anomalies in human development. What if they're not anomalies at all? What if they're evidence of something we don't understand yet? We need to investigate that planet. We need to know the truth." Sophie shook her head. "We can't just go investigate random planets without permission. There are protocols, procedures. If we violate collective regulations, it will only make things worse for humanity." "The planet is in unclaimed space," Lisa pointed out. "That means it's not under collective jurisdiction. Anyone can explore there, and my ship is scheduled for a routine patrol of the frontier sectors anyway. If we happen to detect unusual readings and decided to investigate, well, that's just good scientific practice." Sophie looked at Lisa with a mixture of frustration and grudging respect. "You're talking about bending the rules. If this goes wrong, it could damage Earth's relationship with the collective for decades, and if it goes right?" Nathan asked. "If we find proof that humanity has deeper roots in this galaxy than anyone suspected, that would be worth the risk." Commander Jake Sullivan had been quiet throughout the discussion, but now he spoke up. He was Lisa's security officer, a combat veteran who had seen action in the early conflicts between human colonies. Jake didn't trust the collective, had never hidden that fact, but he was loyal to his crew and his captain. "If we're doing this, we need to be smart about it," Jake said. "No announcements, no requests for permission. We go, we investigate, and if we find nothing, no one needs to know we were there. But if we find something important, we document everything. Multiple copies, multiple secure locations. That way they can't bury it or claim we're making it up." Claire looked worried. "This could end badly. We could find nothing and look foolish. Or we could find something that contradicts what we hope to find. Are we prepared for that?" Nathan met her eyes. "I've spent my whole career trying to prove that humanity matters. That we're not just lucky accidents stumbling around the galaxy. This might be our only chance to find real proof. I have to try. Even if I end up being wrong." Lisa stood and moved to the window. Outside, Xanthera Prime hung in space like a jewel, surrounded by hundreds of ships from across the Horizon's Edge emerged from faster-than-light travel with a shudder that Nathan felt through his boots. He stood on the bridge next to Captain Lisa Monroe, watching as the view screen filled with the image of Kepler 442b. The planet hung in space like a rust-colored marble, its surface marked by ancient craters and dried riverbeds that spoke of water long vanished. The planet was tidally locked to its red dwarf star, which meant one side always faced the sun while the other remained in eternal darkness. Between these extremes lay a twilight band where temperatures were stable enough for the ruins to have survived intact. The scan showed massive structures in this zone, buried under layers of dust and time. Initial readings confirmed what Nathan had suspected. The structures were impossibly old. Dating estimates put them at more than 3 million years, which predated every known galactic civilization by orders of magnitude. The materials used in construction showed technological sophistication, far beyond anything the collective currently possessed. Lisa ordered the ship into a stable orbit and called the landing team to the shuttle bay. Nathan, Claire, Kevin, and Jake gathered their equipment, while Lisa briefed them on safety protocols. They had no idea what they might find down there, and that made every precaution necessary. The descent through the thin atmosphere was rough. Wind patterns in the twilight zone were unpredictable, and their pilot had to fight to keep the shuttle stable. When they finally touched down on the planet's surface, Nathan felt his heart racing. This was it, the moment that would either validate his entire career or prove him to be just another human grasping at significance. The shuttle's ramp lowered, and they stepped out onto alien soil. The landscape was desolate but strangely beautiful. The red dwarf sun hung perpetually near the horizon, casting long shadows across a plain of dark rock and red dust. In the distance, barely visible through the haze, they could see the ruins rising from the ground like the bones of some ancient giant. The walk to the ruins took 20 minutes. With each step, the structures grew more impressive. Walls rose hundreds of feet into the air, smooth and unmarked except for the symbols Nathan had seen in the scans. The architecture was organic, with curves and flowing lines that seemed almost alive despite being carved from stone and metal. Jake kept his weapon ready, scanning for threats even though his instruments showed no signs of life. Old habits from his military days, Nathan supposed. But he couldn't blame the man for being cautious. They were walking into ruins older than their entire species, built by beings unknown for purposes they could only guess at. The entrance to the main structure was a massive archway, tall enough for creatures 3 times human height. Kevin ran his scanner over the surface and whistled low. The composition doesn't match anything in our databases. It's not quite metal and not quite stone. Whatever process they used to create this, we've lost the knowledge. They moved inside, their lights cutting through darkness that had lasted for millions of years. The interior was vast, with corridors branching in multiple directions. The wall still held that faint shimmer Nathan had detected in the scans, as if energy still flowed through them somehow. Claire stopped at one of the walls, running her gloved hand across the surface. There are no bodies, no remains of any kind. It's like everyone just walked away and never came back, or they never had time to leave bodies behind. Jake suggested grimly. They continued deeper into the complex, following Kevin's readings toward a power source he had detected. The energy signature was weak but steady, suggesting systems that had been running for millions of years without maintenance. Nathan couldn't imagine technology that reliable. Even the collective's best systems needed regular service. After nearly an hour of walking, they found sealed doors blocking their path. The doors were covered in symbols, including that spiral pattern Nathan had been obsessing over. Claire approached carefully and pulled out her bioscanner. She wanted to check for any biological hazards before they tried to open the doors. But the moment her scanner touched the door, something happened. Lights flickered to life along the walls. The symbols began to glow with a soft blue radiance, and the doors began to slide open with a sound like grinding stone. Claire jumped back and Jake immediately raised his weapon. But no threat emerged. Instead, words appeared on a panel next to the door, written in multiple languages. Most were unfamiliar, but one of them was recognizable as an ancient form of human writing. Nathan's hands shook as he read the message aloud. "Welcome home, what does that mean?" Kevin asked. "How can we be welcomed home to a place we've never been? Maybe we have been here before," Nathan said quietly. "Or our ancestors were. Come on." They passed through the doors into a chamber unlike anything Nathan had seen in all his years of archaeology. It was spherical, perhaps 200 feet in diameter, with walls covered in holographic displays. At the center of the room stood a pedestal with a crystalline interface that pulsed with inner light. As Nathan approached the pedestal, the entire chamber came to life. Holographic images erupted from every surface, filling the air with star maps and genetic sequences and historical records. The data was overwhelming. Thousands of years of information presented simultaneously, but there was an order to it, a structure that Nathan's mind began to grasp. The others spread out, each drawn to different sections of the display. Kevin focused on the technological data, his eyes wide with wonder as he absorbed specifications for systems beyond his understanding. Claire studied the biological information, her scientific training allowing her to decode complex genetic structures. Jake kept watch at the doorway, uncomfortable with so much unknown. Nathan moved to what appeared to be a historical timeline. The images showed the rise and fall of a great civilization. They called themselves the Terrans. The word sent chills down Nathan's spine. Terra was the Latin name for Earth. But these Terrans had existed millions of years before Latin was spoken, before humans had even evolved into their current form. The timeline showed that the Terrans had once controlled vast regions of the galaxy. They had achieved mastery over both technology and biology, learning to shape life itself according to their needs. But then something had gone wrong. The images showed fleets of strange ships appearing from beyond the galactic rim. The invaders were machines, artificial intelligences that consumed biological matter to fuel their expansion. The war that followed had lasted 10,000 years. The Terrans fought with courage and creativity, but they were losing. World after world fell to the machines. Entire star systems were sterilized of life. The Terrans tried everything: new weapons, new tactics, new technology. Nothing worked. The machines adapted faster than the Terrans could innovate. Nathan found himself watching a particular scene play out in the hologram. A council of Terran leaders, desperate and exhausted, debating their final options. They could keep fighting and lose everything, or they could try something radical, something that might preserve their legacy even if they themselves were doomed. They called it the Genesis Protocol. The Terrans couldn't save their civilization, but they could save their genetic legacy. They identified hundreds of worlds across the galaxy, places where life might survive and evolve in the time it would take for the machine threat to pass. On each world, they planted genetic seeds, simplified versions of their own DNA wrapped in evolutionary algorithms designed to hide the truth. Nathan watched as Terran ships traveled to Earth, a blue jewel hidden in a backwater of the galaxy. They released their genetic payload into the oceans, where it would mix with existing life and slowly reshape evolution according to the hidden patterns. The Terrans left markers, symbols, and structures that would last through the ages, hoping that one day their descendants would find them and understand what they were. Claire's voice broke through Nathan's focus. "You need to see this. Now." He moved to where Claire stood before a display showing complex genetic structures. She pointed at one sequence, then another, her hands shaking slightly. "This is human DNA, not similar to it, actually identical. These are real human genetic markers, exact matches for sequences I've studied for years." She pulled up another display, "And this is Terran DNA according to the database. Look at the comparison. Human DNA contains fragments of the Terran genetic code, not corrupted versions or distant relatives, actual pieces of the original, preserved across millions of years. Those anomalies that Professor Krelthar mocked, they're not accidents. They're compressed genetic archives waiting to be activated," Kevin called out from his position near the technological displays. "It's not just humans. Every major species in the collective has Terran genetic markers. The Zenthori, the Luminar, all of them. But humans have the most complete sequence by far. It's like we're the primary inheritors and everyone else is a distant cousin." Nathan felt his legs go weak and he sat down hard on the floor. Everything suddenly made sense. The anomalies in human evolution weren't flaws. They were features, intentional designs meant to maximize survival potential. Human adaptability, which the galaxy mocked as a sign of poor specialization, was actually the ultimate evolutionary advantage. The Terrans had given humanity the ability to survive anywhere, to adapt to. The horizon's edge raced through space with 6 collective military vessels close behind. Lisa pushed the ship to its limits, weaving through asteroid fields and using gravity wells to throw off pursuit. But the military ships were built for this kind of chase, and they were slowly closing the distance. In the ship's main lab, Nathan and his team worked frantically to make sense of the Terran database. The information Kevin had downloaded was enormous, millions of files spanning every aspect of Terran civilization. It would take years to properly study all of it, But they didn't have years. They had days at most before the collective caught them. Claire focused on the biological data, confirming and expanding on what they had learned at the ruins. The Terrans had been masters of genetic engineering, able to manipulate DNA with precision that made current technology look primitive. They had designed the human genetic code with care, including hidden sequences that would activate under specific conditions. Kevin worked on translating the technical specifications, trying to understand Terran technology. What he found was humbling. The Terrans had solved problems that the collective still struggled with. Faster than light travel, energy generation, artificial gravity. All of these technologies that seemed so advanced were actually simplified versions of what the Terrans had possessed millions of years ago. Nathan studied the historical records, piecing together the story of the Terran fall. The more he read, the more tragic it became. The Terrans had been a peaceful species, more interested in exploration and understanding than conquest. But when the machines came from beyond the galaxy, they had no choice but to fight, and despite their best efforts, they had lost. Jake stood guard at the lab entrance, monitoring tactical displays. His military training made him uncomfortable with how exposed they were. We can't keep running forever. Eventually, they'll corner us or call in enough reinforcements to block every escape route. We need to reach that safe location Vormil mentioned, and we need to do it soon. The coordinates Vormil had sent led to a place called Haven's End, a free colony that existed outside collective jurisdiction. It was populated by people who had left mainstream galactic society for various reasons. Criminals, refugees, independent traders, and others who preferred to live by their own rules. Not the safest place, but better than being captured by the collective fleet. Lisa's voice came through the intercom. We're getting communications from the pursuing ships. They're ordering us to stop and prepare to be boarded. They're also broadcasting accusations on open channels. According to Professor Krelthar, we destroyed a priceless archaeological site and stole sensitive data. He's painting us as reckless criminals who put ancient history at risk for personal glory. Nathan felt anger rise in his chest. Of course, Krelthar would spin it that way. The professor couldn't admit that the site contained evidence contradicting everything the academic establishment believed. Better to accuse the humans of vandalism than admit the truth might require rewriting history books. But there was something odd about the communications. Kevin intercepted and analyzed them, finding layers beneath the official messages. There were encrypted backchannels between the fleet commander and someone on Zenthera Prime, references to protocols and procedures that weren't standard military practice. Mentions of an organization called the Custodians. Who are the Custodians? Claire asked. Kevin searched through his databases but found almost nothing. There are only vague references, always connected to historical preservation and maintaining social stability. But the way these messages talk about them, it sounds like they're some kind of shadow government within the collective. Nathan had a terrible suspicion. What if the Custodians are the ones who erased the Terrans from history in the first place? What if they've been suppressing evidence for thousands of years to maintain the current power structure? That would explain why they're so desperate to catch us, Jake said grimly. We don't just have evidence of ancient history. We have proof of a massive conspiracy. The horizon's edge shuddered as weapons fire struck the shields. The military vessels had gotten close enough to engage. Lisa's voice was strained as she maneuvered to avoid the worst of the barrage. Shields are holding, but I can't keep this up indefinitely. How much farther to Haven's End? Kevin checked the navigation. 8 hours at current speed, but we'll never make it if they keep shooting at us. Nathan made a decision. Kevin, prepare a data package. Everything we found about the Terrans. Compressed and encrypted. We're going to start leaking it to independent news networks and scientific communities across the frontier. If they destroy us, at least the information will survive. Sophie is going to kill us, Claire muttered. She specifically said to think carefully before releasing anything controversial. Sophie also said some truths can cause more harm than good, Nathan replied. But I disagree. The only thing more harmful than a difficult truth is a comfortable lie. The galaxy has been living a lie for millions of years. It's time they knew the truth. Kevin worked quickly, assembling the data package. He included the genetic evidence, the historical timeline, images of the ruins before they collapsed, and enough technical data to prove authenticity. Then he began broadcasting it to every independent media outlet in range. The messages would take hours to reach their destinations, bouncing through relay stations and data networks. But once they were out, there would be no taking them back. The pursuing fleet seemed to sense what they were doing. The attacks intensified, trying to disable the Horizon's Edge before the transmissions could complete. But Lisa was too skilled a pilot. She kept them moving, kept them alive, giving Kevin the time he needed. "Final package sent," Kevin announced. "It's out there now. In a few hours, billions of beings across the frontier will see the evidence." The communications panel lit up with incoming messages. At first, Nathan thought it was more demands from the military fleet, but these were different sources. Independent scientists asking for verification, news networks requesting interviews, other human colonies expressing shock and support. The information was spreading faster than he had anticipated, and then came messages of a different kind. Threats, accusations of fraud, claims that humanity was trying to steal glory from the true inheritors of galactic civilization. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Many species refused to believe that humans could be related to anything greater than themselves. It was easier to dismiss the evidence as fake than to question their entire worldview. But not everyone rejected the evidence. Younger species, those who had also faced discrimination from the elder races, began speaking out. They saw parallels between humanity's struggle and their own experiences. If the collective had lied about the Terrans, what else had they lied about? The political situation was becoming explosive. "We're approaching Haven's End," Lisa announced. "And we've got company. There are ships waiting for us. But they're not military. They're independent vessels, traders and explorers. Some of them are broadcasting messages of support." The pursuing military fleet slowed as they reached Haven's End space. The neutral colony had its own defense systems, and engaging them would be an act of war. More importantly, there were now dozens of independent ships between the Horizon's Edge and its pursuers. Not all of them were friendly to humanity, but they were united in their distrust of collective military overreach. The Horizon's Edge limped into port with damaged shields and strained engines. The station itself was a sprawling collection of modules and platforms, built up over decades by people who valued freedom over comfort. It was rough and dangerous, but it was also honest in a way that Zenthara Prime could never be. As soon as they docked, a message came through from Vormil. The ancient Luminar was waiting for them at a secure location deeper in the station. Nathan gathered his team and they moved quickly through crowded corridors filled with beings from 100 different species. Some stared at them with curiosity. Others looked hostile. Word had spread about what humanity claimed to have discovered. They found Vormil in a private meeting room that looked like it had been carved from crystal. The Luminar archivist was unlike anything Nathan had encountered before. Vormil appeared as a being of pure energy, contained within a roughly humanoid form that shifted and flowed like water made of light. Age was difficult to judge for such a being, but Nathan knew from his research that Vormil had lived for over 2,000 years. The archivist's voice resonated directly in their minds, bypassing the need for translation. "I have reviewed the data you transmitted. The evidence is authentic. The Terrans were real, and they were exactly as magnificent as I suspected." "You knew about them?" Nathan asked. "I suspected," Vormil corrected. "For centuries I have maintained the collective's historical archives, and for centuries I have noticed gaps, missing millennia, references to a precursor race that appear in ancient texts but never in official records. When I asked questions, I was told these were translation errors or cultural myths, but I knew better. Someone had systematically erased the Terrans from history." "The custodians," Kevin said. Vormil's form flickered, which Nathan interpreted as a nod. "The custodians are an organization as old as the collective itself." They were. The galaxy was in chaos. Everywhere Nathan looked through the data streams and news feeds, he saw arguments about the Terrans. Scientists debated the evidence. Politicians argued about what it meant for galactic power structures. Religious leaders questioned how this discovery fit with their teachings about creation and the origins of life. The revelation had touched every aspect of galactic civilization, and nothing would ever be the same. The Horizon's Edge had found temporary shelter at a remote research station, operated by a coalition of younger species. These beings had no loyalty to the collective's elder races, and welcomed the chance to study evidence that might challenge the established order. It wasn't perfect safety, but it gave Nathan and his team time to work. Claire spent her days analyzing genetic samples from different species across the galaxy. With each new sample, the pattern became clearer. Every sentient species carried Terran genetic markers, but in vastly different concentrations. Humans had the highest percentage by far, followed by a few other species that the collective considered primitive or backward. The elder species that ruled the collective had the least Terran DNA, as if their evolutionary path had diverged earliest from the original design. The implications were revolutionary and uncomfortable. The species that considered themselves the natural leaders of galactic civilization were actually the most distant from the Terrans. Meanwhile, the species they looked down upon were the closest genetic relatives to the galaxy's lost founders. It turned the entire social hierarchy upside down. Professor Krelthar remained the most vocal opponent of humanity's claims. The Xanthori scientist appeared on every news network, giving passionate speeches about the dangers of accepting unverified data. According to Krelthar, the genetic evidence could be contamination or coincidence. The historical records could be fabricated. The ruins on Kepler 442b might have been destroyed specifically to hide evidence that would disprove humanity's wild theories. But for every argument Krelthar made, Nathan and his team released more evidence. Kevin had found activation codes in the Terran database, genetic triggers that would unlock dormant DNA sequences under specific conditions. When independent scientists tested these codes on human volunteers, the results were undeniable. The volunteers developed new capabilities, enhanced pattern recognition, improved memory, faster healing. The Terran legacy wasn't just history, it was awakening right now. The most dramatic demonstration came from Kevin himself. He had volunteered to undergo the full activation sequence, allowing Terran genetic programming to modify his DNA in real time. The process took 3 days and was monitored by scientists from a dozen different species. When it was complete, Kevin's genetic structure had changed. New sequences had activated, ones that hadn't been present before. The transformation was captured on video and broadcast across the galaxy. Nathan watched Kevin after the transformation with a mixture of wonder and concern. His friend looked the same on the outside, but something fundamental had changed. Kevin moved with greater confidence, spoke with deeper insight, and seemed to perceive patterns that others missed. It was as if he had become more than he was before. More complete. How do you feel? Nathan asked during one of their private conversations. Kevin considered the question carefully. Like I've been living my whole life with partial vision and suddenly I can see clearly. The Terran genetic code isn't just about physical traits. It's about how we process information, how we understand the universe. I can see connections now that I couldn't see before. It's incredible and terrifying at the same time. Are you still you? Or are you becoming something else? I'm still me, Kevin assured him. But I'm also more than I was. The Terrans didn't design us to be copies of themselves. They designed us to be better. To learn from their mistakes and build something new. This activation, it's not about replacing who I am. It's about fulfilling potential that was always there. On Earth, the reaction to the Terran revelation was complex. Initial celebrations gave way to deeper questions. If humans were designed by the Terrans, did that mean human achievement was less meaningful? Were humans just following a genetic program written millions of years ago? Some people embraced the connection to the Terrans with pride. Others rejected it, insisting that humanity had earned everything through its own efforts. Nathan understood both perspectives. He had spent his career trying to prove humanity's worth through discovery and effort. Learning that human biology came from the Terrans felt like cheating somehow. But Claire helped him see it differently. The Terrans gave us tools, she explained. Good genetics, adaptability, intelligence. But what we did with those tools was entirely up to us. Earth could have remained a primitive world forever. The Terran legacy would have stayed dormant, waiting for activation that never came. Instead, humans explored and learned and grew. We reached the stars on our own, without any help from the Terrans. The genetic code was a gift, but we're the ones who made something of it. Ambassador Sophie was fighting her own battle at the Galactic Collective Council. The emergency session had turned into a prolonged debate about the validity of humanity's claims and what they meant for galactic politics. Sophie presented evidence with calm professionalism, never losing her temper even when council members accused her of spreading propaganda. But the political situation was complicated. Some species saw the Terran revelation as an opportunity to challenge the elder race's dominance. Others feared that accepting humanity's claims would destabilize the collective beyond repair. There were calls for a formal investigation, for independent verification, for tribunals to determine the truth. The bureaucracy threatened to bury the evidence under mountains of procedure. Then something unexpected happened. Vormil appeared before the council and presented evidence that the ancient Luminar had been collecting for centuries. Historical documents that referenced the Terrans, archaeological data from sites across the galaxy, genetic studies that showed the same patterns Claire had discovered. Vormil's testimony carried weight because of the archivist's age and reputation. No one could accuse the ancient Luminar of being a human sympathizer or of fabricating evidence for political gain. The council was forced to take the evidence seriously. They established an independent tribunal to review all data related to the Terrans and issue a binding judgment. Humanity would present its case. The opposition would present theirs, and the galaxy would finally learn the truth, whatever that truth might be. Nathan and his team were invited to testify at the tribunal. It would be held on Xanthera Prime, the same place where Professor Krelthar had mocked humanity just weeks earlier. The symmetry of that wasn't lost on Nathan. They would return to where their humiliation began and present evidence that could change galactic history forever. But before they could depart for the tribunal, danger found them again. The research station's security systems detected an approaching fleet, not military vessels this time, but mercenary ships. The custodians hadn't given up on silencing them, and now they were trying a more direct approach. Jake organized the station's defenders while Lisa prepared the Horizon's Edge for emergency departure. But they were badly outnumbered. The mercenary fleet had enough firepower to destroy the entire station if they wanted to. This wasn't an assassination attempt. This was a massacre in the making. Nathan stood on the station's command deck watching the approaching ships on the displays. He felt oddly calm. They had come so far and discovered so much. If this was where their journey ended, at least they had told the truth. The evidence was out there now. Even if they died, the galaxy would know what they had found. But then something remarkable happened. Other ships began arriving in the system. Independent vessels from dozens of species responding to the crisis. Some came to witness what was happening. Others came to actively defend the station. The news networks had been covering Nathan's story for days, and now people across the galaxy were invested in his survival. The mercenary fleet found itself surrounded by hundreds of ships. Not all of them friendly, but all of them opposed to an unprovoked attack on a research station. The mercenaries withdrew, unwilling to start a battle they couldn't win. The custodians' attempt at silencing the truth had backfired spectacularly, turning Nathan and his team into symbols of resistance against established power. Claire was stunned by the show of support. "I can't believe all these people came to help us. We're not heroes. We're just scientists trying to do our jobs. You're symbols now," Jake said, "whether you want to be or not. You represent everyone who has been dismissed or looked down upon by the establishment, all those younger species who have been told they don't matter. They see themselves in you." Nathan felt the weight of that responsibility. They weren't just fighting for humanity anymore. They were fighting for everyone who had been judged unfairly, everyone who had been told they didn't belong. The Terran legacy wasn't about one species claiming superiority. It was about proving that the galaxy's current hierarchy was built on false foundations. With their safety temporarily assured by the fleet of supporters, they departed for Xanthera Prime. The journey took several days, time that Nathan used to prepare his testimony. He reviewed every piece of. Nathan stood before the tribunal and began his testimony. His voice was steady despite his nervousness. He had spent his entire life preparing for this moment without knowing it. Every excavation, every analysis, every paper he had written had led to this. The truth about the Terrans would finally be heard. He started with the discovery on Kepler 442b, describing the ruins and what they had found there. He presented holographic images of the complex before it collapsed, showing the advanced architecture and the symbols that matched those found on Earth. He explained how the facility had responded to human biological signatures, recognizing them after millions of years. The Chamber of Records had contained the history of the Terran civilization. Nathan showed recordings from the database, translated into multiple languages so everyone could understand. The images depicted the Terran Empire at its height, controlling vast regions of space and achieving technological marvels. Then came the invasion by the machine intelligences, the desperate war, and the final decision to implement the Genesis Protocol. The Terrans couldn't save themselves, Nathan explained, but they could save their legacy. They identified hundreds of worlds where life might develop and seeded them with simplified versions of their genetic code. Earth was one of these worlds. The Terrans planted the seeds of humanity and then disappeared, leaving only hints and markers for their descendants to find millions of years later. Claire took over the testimony to present the biological evidence. She displayed genetic comparisons between humans and the Terran templates. The match was undeniable. Human DNA contained fragments of Terran code, compressed data structures that served no current evolutionary purpose, but made perfect sense as genetic time capsules. But it wasn't just humans, Claire continued. Every sentient species in the galaxy carries some Terran genetic markers. We all descended from the same source, evolving in different directions based on our environments. However, humans retained the highest concentration of original Terran sequences. We're not superior because of this. We're just more complete copies of the original template. She showed genetic analyses from multiple species, each one revealing varying degrees of Terran ancestry. The elder species that ruled the collective had the least Terran DNA. The younger species, those often dismissed as primitive, had more. The pattern suggested that the elder species had diverged earliest from the Terran baseline, while species like humanity had followed the genetic programming more closely. Kevin presented the technological evidence. He showed specifications for Terran systems that were far beyond anything the collective currently possessed. Energy generation, faster-than-light travel, artificial gravity, all of these were simplified versions of what the Terrans had mastered. The current galactic civilizations were children playing with toys, barely understanding the principles behind the technology they used. Then Kevin presented himself as evidence. He showed scans of his DNA from before the activation and after. The differences were clear and documented by independent observers. The Terran genetic sequences had activated, unlocking capabilities that had been dormant. This wasn't theory or speculation. It was observable, verifiable fact. Vormil testified next, and the ancient Luminar's words carried enormous weight. The archivist spoke of centuries spent maintaining historical records and noticing the gaps. References to precursor races that appeared in ancient texts but disappeared from official histories. Archaeological sites that were restricted without explanation. Questions that were discouraged and researchers who were silenced. I have watched the collective suppress the truth about the Terrans for thousands of years, Vormil said. Not out of malice, but out of fear. The current power structure is built on the belief that the elder species earned their positions through merit. To admit that they simply evolved in the ruins of a greater civilization would be humbling. But truth should not be sacrificed for comfort. The archivist presented documents and artifacts that had been hidden away in the deepest parts of the archives. Physical evidence of Terran existence that predated the current civilizations by millions of years. Each piece reinforced the same conclusion. The Terrans were real, they were advanced beyond imagination, and humanity was their direct genetic heir. When it was time for the opposition to present their case, Professor Krelthar approached the platform with characteristic confidence. The Zenthori scientist had spent weeks preparing arguments against humanity's claims, and those arguments were formidable. Krelthar began by questioning the authenticity of the evidence. The ruins on Kepler 442b were conveniently destroyed before independent verification could occur. The genetic data could be the result of contamination or convergent evolution. The historical records could have been fabricated using advanced technology. Without the original site intact, how could anyone verify that the evidence was genuine? The professor brought in expert witnesses who provided alternative explanations for every piece of evidence. The symbols that appeared on both Earth and Kepler 442b could be coincidence or the result of ancient contact between civilizations. The genetic similarities could be natural evolution following similar pathways. The technological similarities could be the result of humans studying and copying collective systems. But Krelthar's most powerful argument wasn't about the evidence itself. It was philosophical. Even if humans are genetically related to the Terrans, the professor said, what does that really mean? That was millions of years ago. The humans who exist today are not the Terrans. They have no memories of Terran civilization, no cultural continuity, no claim to Terran achievements. At best, they are distant descendants. At worst, they are opportunistic frauds trying to claim glory they did not earn. The argument resonated with many in the chamber. Even those who accepted the genetic evidence questioned what it meant for galactic politics. Should humanity receive special treatment because of ancient ancestry? Should the current power structure be overturned based on events that happened millions of years ago? The questions were uncomfortable and complex. Nathan felt his hopes sinking as he listened to Krelthar's arguments. The professor was right about one thing. Genetic heritage alone didn't determine worth. Humanity would still need to prove itself through its own actions and achievements. The Terran legacy was important, but it couldn't be the only thing that defined humanity's place in the galaxy. But then Kevin stood up and asked for permission to address the tribunal again. The judges were surprised but agreed. Kevin approached the platform with a confidence that Nathan hadn't seen before the genetic activation. It was subtle, but there was something different about his friend now. Professor Krelthar is correct that we are not the Terrans, Kevin said, but we are their intended successors. The Genesis Protocol wasn't designed to recreate Terran civilization. It was designed to create something new, something better. The Terrans gave us tools and potential, but what we do with those gifts is entirely up to us. Kevin pulled up data from the Terran database, information they hadn't presented before. The Terrans left activation protocols in our DNA. These protocols were designed to trigger when we reached specific developmental milestones. Not because they wanted to control us, but because they wanted to help us when we were ready. He showed medical scans from humans across the galaxy. Within the last generation, subtle genetic changes had been occurring. Changes that matched the activation protocols exactly. The threshold had been crossed. The Terran legacy wasn't just history. It was happening right now, awakening in response to humanity's achievements. I volunteered to undergo the full activation sequence, Kevin continued. Not because I wanted to become a Terran, but because I wanted to understand what they intended for us. And what I learned is this. The Terran legacy is not about claiming past glory. It's about accepting responsibility for the future. They gave us potential. We have to earn what we become. The chamber fell silent as Kevin spoke. His words had weight that went beyond mere argument. Here was living proof of the Terran legacy, not in ancient ruins or genetic sequences, but in a human being who had bridged the gap between past and present. But that's not all, Kevin said. The activation protocols reveal something else, something that should concern everyone in this chamber. The Terrans didn't fall because they were weak. They fell because they faced a threat they couldn't overcome. And according to their projections, that threat is still out there. He displayed star charts from the Terran database showing the machine intelligence's invasion route. The Terrans had bought time with their sacrifice, pushing the machines back beyond the galactic rim. But they knew the machines would return eventually. And when they did, the galaxy would face the same extinction threat that destroyed the Terrans. The Terrans left us more than genetic code, Kevin said. They left us warnings. They left us defensive technologies and strategies, but most importantly, they left us the knowledge that we cannot afford to be divided when that threat returns. Every species in this chamber carries Terran ancestry. Every species has a stake in survival. We need to stop arguing about who deserves what and start preparing for what's coming. The revelation about the returning threat changed the atmosphere in the 6 months after the tribunal. The galaxy was still adjusting to its new reality. The revelation about the Terrans had changed everything, from scientific research to political alliances to philosophical debates about identity and purpose. Nathan watched these changes from his office on Earth, where he had returned after months of testimony and travel. Earth itself had transformed. What had once been a planet of people struggling to prove their worth was now the acknowledged genetic heir of the greatest civilization in galactic history. But with that recognition came responsibility and difficult choices about what kind of future humanity wanted to build. Not everyone on Earth was happy with the new status. Some wanted to leverage the Terran legacy for power and influence, arguing that humanity should claim ancient Terran territories and technologies by right of inheritance. Others warned that such ambitions would make humanity the enemy of every other species, turning the Terran legacy from a blessing into a curse. Ambassador Sophie had emerged as the voice of moderation in these debates. She argued that the Terrans' greatest gift wasn't their technology or their genetic code. It was their vision of a galaxy where different forms of life could thrive together. The Terrans hadn't tried to preserve their civilization through force or domination. They had scattered seeds and hoped their children would grow into something better. Humanity should honor that vision, Sophie said in her speeches. We should build a new future, not try to resurrect the past. The Terrans gave us potential. What we do with it defines who we are, not where we came from. Her words resonated with many, and Earth's government officially adopted a policy of cooperation rather than dominance. Humanity would share what it learned about the Terrans with all species. The genetic legacy would be studied openly. The technologies would be adapted for common benefit. It was a choice that earned respect from younger species while frustrating those who had hoped to use the Terran connection for personal or political gain. Nathan's role had also changed. He was no longer just a researcher struggling for recognition. He had become the face of humanity's greatest discovery, giving lectures and interviews across the galaxy. But what he enjoyed most was the actual work, leading expeditions to find other Terran archives scattered throughout the galaxy. Kevin's analysis of the Terran database had revealed a vast network of hidden installations. The Terrans had known their empire would fall, so they had hidden knowledge caches in locations that would survive the ages. Each archive was designed to activate when the genetic heirs were ready, containing information tailored to specific challenges they might face. The Horizon's Edge had been recommissioned for these expeditions, with Lisa still commanding and Jake still serving as security chief. But the crew was now mixed, including scientists from dozens of species. The search for Terran wisdom had become a unifying project, bringing together beings who might otherwise have remained enemies. One of the most surprising additions to the crew was Professor Krelthar. The Zenthori scientist had asked to join the expeditions, offering 400 years of expertise in exchange for a chance at redemption. Nathan had been skeptical at first, remembering the professor's harsh words at that first conference. But Krelthar had proven sincere in the desire to make amends. Their partnership had been awkward initially. Krelthar's pride had been wounded by being proven wrong, and Nathan had struggled to trust someone who had publicly mocked humanity. But as they explored Terran sites together, mutual respect developed. Krelthar's scientific knowledge was invaluable in deciphering Terran notation, while Nathan's intuitive understanding of Terran thinking provided breakthroughs that pure analysis couldn't achieve. Their third joint expedition took them to a moon orbiting a gas giant in a distant system. The Terran archive there was different from the one on Kepler 442b. Instead of a massive complex, they found a small facility carved into the moon's interior. But what it lacked in size, it made up for in importance. This archive was dedicated to the machine intelligence threat. It contained detailed records of the war that had destroyed the Terran Empire, including tactical analyses and technological specifications. But it also contained something more disturbing: updated projections of when the machines would return. Kevin was the one who discovered the timeline buried in the data. His enhanced abilities allowed him to see patterns that others missed. The machines aren't just coming back eventually, they're coming back soon, within our lifetimes. The Terrans bought us millions of years, but that time is almost up. The revelation sent shockwaves through the expedition team, and then through the galaxy, when they reported their findings. The abstract threat that had been mentioned at the tribunal was now concrete and imminent. The machines that had destroyed the Terrans were returning, and the current civilizations had perhaps a few decades to prepare. The collective council called emergency sessions. Species that had withdrawn after the tribunal returned to participate. The existential threat had a way of making old prejudices seem petty and pointless. If they didn't work together, they would all die together. It was that simple. Nathan found himself presenting to the council again, this time with Krelthar at his side. Together, they explained what the Terrans had learned about fighting the machines. The enemy adapted quickly, learning from each encounter and evolving its tactics. Whatever had worked for the Terrans wouldn't work for their descendants. The galaxy would need to innovate, to become something more than just inheritors of ancient knowledge. But the archive also contained hope. The Terrans had developed weapons and defenses that had slowed the machines. They had discovered weaknesses in machine intelligence, limitations in how artificial minds processed certain types of information. Most importantly, they had proven that biological life could fight back and win individual battles, even if they had ultimately lost the war. The galaxy didn't have the luxury of debating anymore. Defense committees were formed with representatives from every species. Ancient rivalries were set aside. Resources were pooled. The younger species that had been dismissed as primitive found themselves valued for their fresh perspectives. The elder species that had dominated galactic politics found themselves having to listen and cooperate rather than command. Humanity played a central role in these preparations, not because of genetic privilege but because of what they had learned from the Terran archives. Claire led biological research teams studying how Terran genetic enhancements could improve survival capabilities. Kevin worked with engineers from multiple species to adapt Terran technology for modern use. Nathan coordinated archaeological expeditions to find more archives and more knowledge. Jake trained mixed-species military units, teaching them tactics that combined Terran strategy with innovations from current civilizations. His experience as a combat veteran was invaluable, but he also learned from alien warriors who brought their own unique approaches to warfare. The galaxy was becoming stronger through cooperation, just as the Terrans had hoped. Lisa commanded one of the new defensive fleets being assembled at strategic locations around the galaxy. The ships were built using a combination of Terran designs and modern technology, resulting in vessels more powerful than anything the collective had possessed before. But Lisa knew that power alone wouldn't be enough. They needed intelligence, creativity, and the willingness to sacrifice for the greater good. As the months passed, Nathan found himself reflecting on how much had changed. He had started this journey trying to prove that humanity deserved respect. He had discovered that humanity was descended from gods and had earned recognition beyond his wildest dreams. But now that recognition seemed less important than the work itself. The Terran legacy was important, but it wasn't what defined humanity's worth. What mattered was what humans did with that legacy, the choices they made, the sacrifices they were willing to endure, the future they would build alongside other species. One evening, Nathan stood in the Grand Assembly Chamber again, the same place where Krelthar had mocked humanity months earlier. But the chamber had changed. Where there had been rigid hierarchies based on age and tradition, there was now genuine cooperation. Where there had been dismissal of younger species, there was now respect for all voices. The Terran revelation had broken the old order, and something better was emerging from the pieces. He was presenting findings from another Terran archive, this one containing cultural records and philosophical texts. The Terrans had been poets and artists as well as scientists and engineers. They had questioned themselves constantly, debating the right way to use their power and the responsibilities that came with it. The most interesting discovery was a message that the Terrans had left specifically for their genetic descendants. It had been encoded in a way that required both Terran DNA and activated genetic sequences to access, ensuring that only their true heirs would ever read it. Kevin had been the one to unlock it, and Nathan now shared its contents with the assembled species. The message was simple but profound. To our children across time, the message began, "We do not know what you will be when you read this. We hope you are better than we were. We hope you learned from our mistakes. We gave you the potential to survive.